What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 69 of Sales Stories in Real Life. I'm your host, Alex Bruschi, and this is the show where professional salespeople share their stories about memorable buying experiences. Today, we've got my man. We just went to the Kendrick concert 2 weeks ago, Mr. Jeshua Posey in the house,
What's
Senior
up?
Manager of Sales Dev at NorthBay Solutions. Shu, I'm gonna call you Shu. Um, I heard you had a really interesting buying experience when you were looking for an engagement platform to engage customers via email at mass. What the heck happened there? Before we get started, I want to introduce you to Lead Feeder. We all know the struggle of identifying website visitors and turning them into valuable leads. Imagine having the power to identify companies visiting your website, track their behavior in real time, and seamlessly integrate it all into your CRM. With customizable notifications, lead scoring, and GDPR compliance, Leadfeeder is changing the lead generation game. Head over to leadfeeder.com, LEADFEEDER.com for a demo today. Now, back to the conversation.
Yeah, we can always start with the good. But first of all, it's great to see you, brother. The
Always
hair
a
is
pleasure.
the hair is looking wonderful as always. As you can see, I have completely gone monk. So I don't know how you keep up with all that hair. It's very, very time consuming.
Do my best to keep it in check.
There you go. But yeah. I've been in tech or sales for 10 years, so I bought a lot of stuff, gotten rid of a lot of stuff, and lots of experiences with B2B procurement. And the great thing about procuring, different tools is you really get to see the advocacy on your behalf by the organization that you're interested in, right? And a lot of the times you can quickly see the reps level of experience or expertise very early on in the buying cycle. And a lot of the times you'll see things where, everyone flocks to the large deals, right? But as you know, in your experience, most of the big deals start small and they scale up, right? It's usually a try and buy or something like that. And that's a strategy I typically like to use when I'm looking at procuring software. I don't like to reveal that, I'm looking for 10 or 15 seats. I'll just say, oh, looking for two or three, right? Just to start things off, but also see how's this relationship going to be. And in this particular experience, we were looking for, a platform like Sales Law for outreach. We were going through multi-vendor POCs, and particularly we're already leaning in one direction. And what was really notable about this particular rep from this platform is, a lot of times, and this as a salesperson, you spend a lot of time creating that deck. You spend a lot of time doing all that, research and, creating a very tailored, personalized value proposition with, ROI expectations, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And a lot of the times, if you don't get to present that information, you kind of feel, a little bit like, almost disappointed because you put so much time and effort into that. And I've seen this from sales reps sometimes. It's like they just want to present. But in any
What's up, everybody? Whether you're new here or a seasoned listener, please drop a subscribe and like on your favorite streaming platform, Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcast. Super helpful for getting the show out to more people. And if you yourself have ever wanted to start your own podcast, send me a DM on LinkedIn, and in just 2 to 3 hours per week, I can help you to start and maintain your own podcast. Make your voice heard and start a podcast today. Now, back to the conversation.
but in any case, I'll come in and in this particular case said, hey, this is what we're looking at. We're already POCing your competitor. This is the competitor. I'm very transparent in the process. and I told him exactly what we were looking for. And the conversation was, how quickly do you want to move? Not like, all right, let's talk about, why we're better or what have you. They literally just matched exactly where we were at with the competitor. Didn't try to, do a bunch of unnecessary calls and different things like that. Was just like, okay, well, how can we compare apples to apples and make sure that you get the pricing that's comparative as well? So I really thought that was one of the smoothest processes I've ever had, to be honest. I expected it to be, a little bit drug out when it came to just saying, hey, look, we're late stage with them. Here's what they're asking us to pay for their platform. Here's potentially what we're looking at from a budget, timeline, implementation perspective, and going from there.
This is a classic example for me of like stay out of your own way. It's like someone comes to you and they're ready or they're very deep into the buying cycle. I think you said it perfectly. Like, why take on that extra pitching or like why overplay your hand? You said one thing that like really, really stood out to me is like you could tell right away from the beginning whether the person you're talking to like knows what they're talking about or not as far as their space, the product. What are kind of like those giveaways for you? Like for you as a buyer, what are kind of those things of like, ooh, this person really knows their stuff, or ooh, I'm dealing with someone a little more green.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So just to give you some insight, in my past life, before I got into tech, I was a claim investigator for almost 5 years. So I worked directly with an attorney, and we would review files together, claims that are worth millions of dollars. And we would have to determine whether we should pay or decline these claims. And
Yeah.
there's always this threat of a lawsuit because you do something wrong. So you have to be extremely thorough before you make a decision, right? So that past life has trickled into the way I approach reviewing vendors, right? And a lot of the times when you get into these strategic conversations, especially if you're doing multiple POCs or RFPs, which no salesperson likes to do, right? One of the things that I find to be very telling of the experience level is if I come into the conversation, I say, here are the products and services that I'm interested in. And here is the amount of seats that we're looking to bring on at this time. The the kind of the trick to those two propositions that I give is a lot of the times the rep will focus on the seats right away. Oh, are you guys going to scale? What's the size of the team? Et cetera, et cetera. So that automatically tells me this person is not really looking at what I'm actually saying, which more importantly is the features that I want. I could tell you, I'd say 60% of the time, whenever I say that, these are the features I want, a lot of the times they don't even say, have you looked at the next iteration of those features? Or here's where we really stand out when it comes to that. It ends up becoming, okay, let's talk about seats. Let's talk about bundling. And they kind of can lose me in that context because it's not a big thing for me early in the process to talk about seats. It's
Right.
really about what is the implied ROI I'm going to get based on these features. And you know, scale typically happens over time, right? That's a given. But if I could tell you, quote unquote, have what is it, sales breath, whatever people call that nowadays,
Mission breath. Yeah.
mission breath, right? Yeah, exactly. Then it kind of makes the process a little bit more complicated and drawn out than I would like to participate in. And so typically when I approach the conversation from those um, points, I can tell they'll also an experienced seller will dig into what is your perception of the features? What do you like? What do you don't like? Do you actually have an accurate perception of what these things actually do? Because sometimes,
Yeah.
you do your research, you test out the features, you do your trial, but you may not be getting the full bang for your buck because you're not the, SA, you're not the technical person. So you may not be getting the best out of, those particular features.
That's a really, really great perspective there. And you kind of painted the picture beautifully, and this is exactly why I was really excited to have you as a guest. Is like you started off as an individual contributor, and I see you were a manager. You're now still a manager, but now you're also tackling the procurement side of things. So I think that creates like a really well-rounded perspective. So walk me through, let's run that same situation down as an example and say, like, you are obviously, given your background, really deeply thorough, a lot of research, I'm sure, like reviews and studies and G2s and
I love
Foresters.
I
Yeah,
love
there you go. There you go. So you're
and
you're
Reddit.
going in there with a pretty
Yeah.
with a pretty formulated opinion, not a final opinion, but you're going in there with your own buyer POV. Like a seller should have a POV. You're going in there with your own POV.
Mhm.
If you're talking to a salesperson that knows what they're doing and you mentioned like, hey, I want to use this feature for X. But meanwhile, the salesperson knows in the back of their head, like, hey, you should actually be using that feature for Y. How would you want a salesperson to challenge you on that? Let's just say.
Well, I'm in sales, so challenge me, right? Like, I want you to pitch me. I want you to challenge me. I want you to confirm what I know. Like, that's the advantage of salespeople working with salespeople is there's an inherent desire to be sold to, right? Like, you go out in public and, people are pitching you at the grocery store, on the way out of the store, in the store, at the close. There's always people trying to sell me stuff. And I'm always giving objections because I want to see how good they are, right? Like, I want you to sell me something. I want to be convinced, but a lot of the times that doesn't take place. So for me, when I'm talking to a rep and they give me a bit of a pushback, I can appreciate that because I do my best to know what I'm getting myself into. But at the end of the day, like, I don't work for that company. They're going to know a little bit more than I do for the most part.
Right. What does the pre-buying research process look like? Just to maybe for
Oh,
sellers that are listening in, that when someone
secret
says, "Ooh,
sauce.
I did research," but what does that actually look like?
Secret sauce. Okay. I'll tell you exactly what I do. So whenever I'm deciding on, well, let me take one more step back. The only time I care about investing in a platform is there's an ROI I'm trying to achieve. And that can be abstracted by something like, abstracted away because our data quality is not that great. So that's affecting, our ability to reach the right people, right? So I need to increase our data quality to thus increase our ability to procure newer opportunities and find the right people, right? Et cetera, et cetera. This like a waterfall. Um, so until I identify a problem, I won't do a lot of research. I'll stay abreast of things, but I typically don't start poking around until I'm almost at the point where I think we're going to enter into some type of potential POC, right? So what that process looks like is, for example, I have an SDR who is really struggling on driving opportunities in terms of converting them from MQL or marketing accepted, right? Our team says this is good, but then seeing the sales rep convert that also, right? And so if they're putting this person put up 30 opportunities in a quarter and only 50% of those have converted, that tells me we are trending on benchmark data. Like if you're looking at something like Topo or some of the other players like Gartner, right? And so to me, okay, yeah, we're at benchmark, but we can do well above that. We could do 70 to 80% if we key in on what we actually need to do to get better outcomes.
Mhm.
But when you start to get into you're managing 10, 15 people, it's really hard to take a one-on-one approach in coaching, training, mentoring, and optimizing reps. So then I would say, okay, well, at this level of scale, there's no way for me to realistically dial in these conversion ratios with only me right now. So now, what tool could I leverage to help me coach, train, and mentor better? So this is, then I would say, okay, well, I know like now there's AI automation tools that do recording, do automated coaching. You know, some of the auto dialers have this built in nowadays. So that might be an add-on to what we already have, or maybe I need to go procure something else. So, okay, now I've identified a problem. Now I've identified a potential solution to this problem.
Yeah.
Can I then start to look for something that's already out there giving me the outcome I'm looking for? So then this is where me and my best friend Incognito will start to poke around, right? So, you know, I know there's no cookie data on me from other companies because I only browse on Incognito. There's no way to track me, right? So, but what I will look for specifically is I know what the problem is. I know what a potential solution is. How do I find a case study? I don't really want to talk to a rep at this point. I want a case study. And a lot of the times I think sales reps don't realize there are most of us on the procurement side are wanting to digest first. So I will accept LinkedIn messages. I read every single email. I check my spam folder. I read all those emails. I check all my DMs. 9 times out of 10, they're just not giving me the content I'm looking for, right? And so I want to read something that's going to tell me you can get, if you've got X as a problem and you're looking for Y, I can give you Z outcome. So I'm the kind of person that's going to go on the website, download a case study, read it, see if I can get where I need to go. If that starts to check off boxes, I'll look for a few more of those around their competitors. And then the easiest way to do this is just to go on G2 and then do a side-by-side comparison of the platforms that you're interested in. And that's how I will get a few legs up. So I'm not engaging when I have all these other questions that need to be answered before we can move down the sales cycle with a vendor.
That's really good perspective. I feel like that's a really good encapsulation of the modern buyer journey is like a buyer can come to you and they could be 80, 90% through the buying process already. And they're really just wanting to talk to a rep to just confirm some final things. And I mean, you even mentioned it earlier, like you were pretty much leaning the direction that you were going to go already. So one thing that you said there that I caught on and I got to get your take on this is you said like 9 times out of 10 folks aren't sending you the content that you want. What
Mm-hmm.
what does the ideal content look like at that point of the buying process?
Yeah, so it's like a lot of the times, you'll get a DM, you'll get an email, and it'll just be it's there, I would say, it's a word I can use for it. Erroneous data. Like you see it all the time. 80% of sales teams struggle with this. 90% of SDRs struggle with this. No, they don't. Like you're making these figures up. And if you're really, you've got your finger on the pulse of the industry, you're studying benchmark data regularly, Gartner, Topo, you have a fundamental understanding of where the metrics are.
Yeah.
So seeing these kind of emails are off-putting. They just immediately lose credibility.
Yeah.
So then it's okay, well, I know that these figures are incorrect. The email must not be, of substance either. So I get a lot of those in my DMs as well, where I'll just get emails, 70% of leaders are wasting a lot of time onboarding and training reps. And I'm like, that's not true. Like, so for me, the type of content I need to see is not about the metrics. It's about what specific problem do you solve and for who? And it sounds very cliche, but a lot of people don't do it. Like if you look through your email, think about how many times someone will just say, hey, Alex, listen, I know in general, sales reps typically can struggle with extended buying cycles because of, intangibles. People are out of office, maybe budget constraints, people leave the company. And a lot of times this, causes unpredictability with your forecasting. A lot of reps are using X product in order to catch that ahead of time and thus provide more predictability, which helps you hit your number more consistently and or manage expectations for leadership a little better than you normally could. Does this sound like something you're dealing with? Right? Or here's a case study, right? Like I would look at that and be like, that's interesting. Let me read
Yeah.
that, right? And so I think a lot of the times, and this is how I train my reps, like your case study is your validation to what you're saying. It's your credibility. So take the case study, look at who is actually being targeted by that case study, find that persona, pull out the use case, pull out the value proposition, write a quick 50-character email, send it to them. Hey, if this resonates with you, I'll send you the case study this came from. And that's like all I'm looking for, right? But most of the time we just, we don't get that. People want to send you the clickbait, right? And that's, it's off-putting for someone like me.
I love how specific you got in that example as well. And this is one of the things that I'm like so cognizant of, like even almost like borderline to a fault, is like presenting information that feels phony. Because like even if it's phony or even if it's not phony, like if it feels phony, it's still going to be a downgrade.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm particularly, I don't want to say worried about this, but this is something that's particularly very top of mind for me. And so I've got to ask, because you mentioned this earlier, of like you're a lot of times when you're procuring a tool, like you're looking at it from an ROI perspective, which most are as well. How do you make your ROI calculations? This is a salesperson now. How does a salesperson make their ROI calculations not sound like bullshit, right? Like,
Yeah.
how do you like open up an ROI study from a vendor and think to yourself like, oh, this looks reasonable, or like, oh, this is just like a load of crap?
Nonsense. Yeah. So think about this, and I'll kind of talk in more of a analogy here. So a lot of the times, empathy and really putting yourself in the other in your prospect shoes is going to serve you a lot more than you think, right? Because for example, I'm building a team from scratch, right? I'm onboarding, training, optimizing. I've got budget. I don't have, $100 million worth of funding to throw at things. I don't. And I don't need that either, right? But I do have to be thorough and strategic in the products or services that I present as going to potentially drive more pipeline and opportunity and close and revenue for my organization. So a lot of the times, I don't think people are thinking that if this product is not best suited for this person, this is going to cause them to lose credibility internally and them to also potentially lose their job, right?
Right.
When you're when you've spent time in startups or hyper growth companies, these little decisions can become a snowball of a problem, right? And a lot of the times company or reps don't even think about that or the implications, right? Like even like, for example, if I was using Salesforce, and I've seen this before in a previous life, a rep would email me and they would say, hey, you moved to HubSpot. We can migrate all your data, get you up and running in 2 months. It's impossible. It's not going to happen, right? Like it's not going to happen. And to put that in an email and to set that precedence, right, without knowing how much data do they actually have to push over, right? What like how many reps do they have? Is it going to be a one-to-one, right? Because
Right.
sometimes it's not the migration itself, it's the structuring and consolidating the data from multiple sources that makes the project extremely difficult. And that may be a huge project that they could not foresee. And so it's really important to think about who you're sending the message to and communicating it in a way where there is a level of transparency, but also empathy. Hey, here's a lot, this is what a lot of folks are going through that are in a similar role as you. Here's what they're doing to reach this ROI, right? The scale can be different depending on your environment, depending on how many resources you have, but that's something we can talk about. But a lot of the times you get lost when you just try to throw out a bunch of information that you hope is going to be, it's going to like stick and like get that impulsive reaction from your buyer. And a lot of the times it just doesn't end up going over well.
Solid, solid. Let's switch gears to this because I think again, like your background is really, really unique and perfect for this show where like you're sales rep, sales manager, procurement. I mean, like the trifecta for being more buyer centric. What was the biggest thing that you learned going from IC to manager, now to procurement? Like what was one of your biggest takeaways from all that movement?
Um, well, so I've always had like interest in um learning about the technologies that we use and why we use them and how do we get more out of them, right? And so the first time I was a SDR, way back, I think it was like 2015 or something like that. Like we were using Salesforce as the CRM and SCP. Like there was no, you know, sequencing outside of that. Every email we sent was manually written. We had all our templates stored in Excel files and, Word documents. Auto dialers were just becoming a thing, like Zoom info was in its infancy for us. So I always was very intrigued, and I was always the one like requesting admin control to see what can I pull out of this? What type of reports can I consolidate?
Yeah.
I'd gotten admin control at Salesforce in that time too. So even as a IC, I always knew the ins and outs of all the platforms I leveraged. And so when I crossed into management, I already had the admin experience to really do everything I could to get better data out of the motions that would lead to close revenue. And so now, managing and procuring and managing platforms, it's really just more of what I already know. But I think intuitively, it takes someone who is very, very analytical and data driven, which is where I'm more so kind of where I fall. you know, I I could tell you conversion ratios in terms of how many touches it takes to get to a meeting. I could tell you which technical titles are most likely to resonate with specific messages. I could tell you the conversion ratios between meetings attended and meetings converted. I could tell you average deal size, buying life cycle timelines, but that's because I'm in the data. I'm running all the reports, I'm building all the dashboards. I'm really getting very nerdy about it. But because at the end of the day, it's to create a calculator, right? That's the goal of every product and service I try to procure, is to further optimize the calculator. If I deploy a resource, i.e., a sales development rep, I can then reverse engineer from the data we have. I could say, all right, our average deal size is 150K. That deal size takes half a year. Based on our data, it takes at least 12 touches for that person, if it's the right person, right company, right time, to convert. And I can tell you the likelihood of that person being going to attend the meeting, and I can tell you the likelihood of that converting into an opportunity. So whenever I'm looking at products and services, that's what I'm thinking. How do I optimize this calculator? How do I dial those numbers back? How do I get from 12 touches to 10 touches to 8 touches to 5 touches? How do I make sure that this rep with the least amount of activity can get the most results, right? And so you see people all the time, they'll say, oh, I've I made 500 calls this week. I got 12 answers in 2 meetings. And you're like, oh, that's great. Well, what if I told you I could get a rep to do 50 calls, get 10 connects and 6 meetings because of how data driven it is, right?
Right.
And so when I'm looking at products and services, nothing in our stack do I care if it's nice to use and it's cool. I don't care about that. The only thing I care about is this going to help us generate more pipeline and thus drive more opportunities and thus close more deals for the sales team? And are we going to convert that at a high percentage that's above industry standards quicker than anyone else can do that? And if so, that's where we're going to potentially look at procuring new software.
It's exactly what I feel like every salesperson needs to hear is like I feel like so many people like think that like folks are like so obsessed with like the new updates and like whatever the new feature that just dropped, but like what you just said right there is what the buyer is actually thinking, right? Like everything else is just kind of like confetti and like fluff even. So I mean, tell us, Shu, like let's say salespeople out there that are still listening, appreciate it. How can folks be more buyer centric in both their approaches, their outreach, right? Like how can they resonate more with their buyers' thoughts?
Um, so there's this show I grew up watching with my mom, and it was called The Pretender. And essentially what this gentleman would do is he would have specific things that he needed to do. I don't whatever it was, like, and he would become whoever he needed to be to do that job. So there was an episode where he became a professional race car driver to do something specific. There was an episode he became a doctor, he became a soccer player, he became a football player, he became, a dentist. Like, he had this genius ability to learn and become anything you could think of. And I think a lot of the times, going back to empathy and putting yourself in someone else's shoes, you have to really think like, what does this person spend their time doing? And what does in the process that they're trying to implement or optimize to reach an outcome, what are the roadblocks and challenges? And how does that affect them? Is that their personal life? Is that their professional life? Is it time? Is it complex? Like, what are the impacts to the challenges that they have, right? And a lot of the times, I don't think there's enough time spent understanding your persona, right? Because I've been on the technical sales side for my whole career. I sell to engineers, right? I don't sell to salespeople. So I talk to cloud infrastructure, generative AI engineers, application engineers. I talk to engineers that work on top of GCP, Azure, AWS. Like, they're all of them care about different things, and all of them use different types of technologies and services to accomplish those goals. And if I were to approach a data engineer the same way I approach a security engineer, I would never have any success, because fundamentally, they care about different things, and fundamentally, they're hardwired very differently. They're very different personalities, right? Someone who only wants to deal with data is not the same kind of person that likes to build infrastructure, right? Is not the same kind of person that likes to secure a technical environment. And if I don't know those fundamental differences, and then I go to approach prospecting, calling them, pitching them, 9 times out of 10, I'm not going to get anywhere because I won't be speaking their language. And so it really takes your ability and putting on their persona and really understanding who they are, what they do, what makes them tick, even their watering holes. Where do they socialize? Where do they learn about new things? You know, blogs, newsletters, LinkedIn communities, in-person networking events.
Yeah.
You really have to get methodical if you're gonna be in that top 1% of 1% to really stand out and make a difference. So a lot of this stuff, man, comes out very early in the sales cycle for me. And I'm just kind of like, all right, this is gonna be a long day. Or I'm like, yeah, this guy gets it, this gal gets it. Like, we're gonna have a really good experience together.
I mean, just hearing how like masterfully you know each little wrinkle and each little nuance of each technical buyer, I mean, just kind of says it all. What's the big takeaway for the folks who are still hanging around? We appreciate you guys. What's one thing that folks can take away and immediately implement into their into their everyday lives?
Yeah, don't get into this space unless you care, right? Like a lot
Mm.
of people, sure, you can make money, you can check the boxes, but like think of how many people are on LinkedIn right now complaining about how much they hate their job, right? Or how much, things are not going for them. And, I empathize for them a lot because a lot of the times we get sucked into this, we just want the money, we want the freedom, but we don't realize there's a lot of, you need to actually care about what you're doing and who you're doing it for. I grew up coding. I was building computers when I was 12 years old. I learned C++, C# when I was a kid. I was doing a lot of this stuff as a child. So when I get into a conversation with like engineer who's working on Azure, I can talk to him about C#, C++, because it's the foundational coding language that Azure is built on. This is Microsoft. And I can just have a nerdy conversation with them about, technology because I'm a nerd. Like I grew up doing that. I grew up gaming, like I've played all these cool games and, built different, computers and different things like that and coded up my own algorithms for these use cases. And so for me, I'm talking to the people I like talking to. I have a ton of friends that are actually engineers and data scientists and stuff like that. So for me, this is normal. This is the world that I grew up around. And, I just happen to kind of take the sales route instead of becoming an engineer. So I think at the end of the day, care about who you're talking to, take the time to really understand. And if that seems like a tall order, like take the data-driven approach. Go look at, which opportunities were sourced in your territory. Look at the titles that you saw close one with, and go get to know those titles, and then go rinse and repeat.
Man, I'll tell you one thing. There's one thing I've learned from you is that you know your buyer's worlds inside out and left and right and in and out just as well if not better the way that they do, and I think that's something that a lot of the folks that are listening in can take away is like learn your personas, know their worlds inside and out. Shu, this has been absolutely fantastic. Unfortunately, we're running out of time here, so we do
Thanks
have
for
to
having
jump.
me.
Connect with Yeshua on LinkedIn. You may have even seen some food photos from him or recipes back in the day. Promise it'll be a follow that you won't regret. Sales Stories in Real Life, fam. We will see you next week. Thanks again, Shu. Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers.